One of the challenges that we faced is sort of telling the story of why our shoes are, different, how they're better.
He's the director of marketing at Clove, a brand that designs shoes for healthcare professionals.
Every decision that we make when it comes to our shoes is how can we make it more comfortable and protective, for people that are doing a really hard job, that are on their feet 12 plus hours a day.
Being a marketer is about balancing out how do I acquire customers, but how do I do like traditional brand building, like building a great product, building a great brand experience.
It's also incredibly stressful. Would you believe I had a full head of hair before I started? Basically just telling an AI agent like, hey, go find me the best X thing for under Y price and just do that whole transaction for me. It's like, where's the fun in that?
Okay, we are live. Here we go. So welcome back to the Brilliant Commerce Podcast, where I get a chance to sit down with some of the brightest minds in commerce and unpack what it really takes to build iconic, or what I like to say, soon to be iconic brands. Today, joining me, my guest, Nick Sanetra, is someone who knows this tension really well. He's the director of marketing at Clove, a brand that designs shoes for healthcare professionals who are on their feet all day. Nick has spent nearly 20 years across agencies, ad networks, and SaaS before moving in-house. And he's become an expert in finding what he likes to call the holes in the bucket, the exact points in the funnel where customers are falling out. And I think he's one of the smartest people about how to fix those holes in the bucket. So on today's episode, we'll talk about exactly some of those spots that he's seen leaks, the changing landscape of the MarTech stack, and as someone who is always learning and refining his tools, I think Nick will leave us with some wisdom about some of the different ways that you can look for those leaks in your bucket, and hopefully we can leave you with some tips to fix them. So Nick, thanks for joining me, and welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Before we sort of like dive into all things marketing and leaky buckets, first, where am I finding you today?
I'm in San Diego, California.
Okay, cool. So I'm not that far north of you. I could have seen by that kind of light. You've been based in San Diego for your entire career?
No, so I've been kind of all up and down California. I spent most of my life out here, but I've been in San Diego and then up to Orange County, up to the Bay Area, back down to San Diego again. So now I think I've probably been in San Diego for most of the time I've been in California, but I've been around a little bit.
Definitely a nice place to call home.
Indeed.
So Nick, I'm finding you today at a brand called Clove, which was new to me, but I really enjoyed getting to know it. Like I'm sure a lot of people listening today, I buy a lot of my footwear online. Can you take a couple of minutes and educate me a little bit on the origin story of Clove and maybe what makes the products unique and different?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the origin story is really interesting because it's ultimately a love story. So Joe Ammon, our founder and CEO, his wife Tamara is a nurse. And so, back 2018, 2019, he was watching her go through this sort of footwear journey, right? Of, the time a lot of healthcare workers were wearing clogs or they're wearing, tennis shoes. And there wasn't, one shoe that checked all the boxes when it comes to form and function, right? So your, tennis shoes are decent looking, relatively comfortable, but then they're also, got a mesh, fabric upper, which you do not want to be getting exposed to amniotic fluid, blood, everything else that you're dealing with in a hospital environment, right? And then you've got the clogs, which are, I'm sorry to say, ugly as sin, not very fluid protective.
I better hide my clogs right now.
Yeah. So, and so the landscape has changed. It used to be, the kind of the main competition back in 2019 was clogs. That was sort of who we were up against. And that was a relatively easy fight, I would say. Now we know that sort of tastes and, expectations have changed, and who we're up against today are large running shoe brands. And one of the challenges that we faced is sort of telling the story of why our shoes are, different and, how they're better, right? And ultimately it boils down to this, is that every decision that goes into the design of a running shoe is around how do we make this better for running. It sounds, very, very elementary, but, you think about a modern running shoe, a lot of them have a rocker bottom outsole, right? That is designed for, energy transfer heel to toe. So they're thinking, lighter, faster, stronger. But the things that make the same things that make the shoe really effective for running make it not as good for standing or walking for very long periods of time, which is what healthcare workers are doing, right? So like nurses are walking on average a marathon every week. They're on their feet
Come
12 hours
on.
a day.
Wow.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was listening to your episode with Jason Bertrand from Purple earlier, and he was saying like, hey, you're on your back 8 hours a day, and I was kind of smugly grinning to myself of like, hey, healthcare workers are on their feet for 12 hours a day at least, right? So it's even arguably even a higher bar to hit. So I'm monologuing a little bit here, but every decision that we make when it comes to our shoes is how can we make it more comfortable and protective, for people that are doing a really hard job, that are on their feet 12 plus hours a day, right? And how can we crush that 12-hour shift and have them feeling amazing coming out the other end of that?
I love that. And I would imagine that gives you this, in terms of the storytelling, the educational component, like that's such an important part of marketing. And we'll get into this later on when we talk about performance marketing, which is just like, okay, I've got someone that's interested and I need to get them like all the way through. But how do I, like you're talking about the creation of an entire category, and how do I make sure that, how do you show up in a conversation to be, how do you find people with a product they didn't know they were looking for, I guess is what I was trying to ask. And I think maybe it starts with storytelling. I love this idea that it was started by people who were trying to solve a problem that was very personal to them. I mean, I think if you look across the landscape of some of these incredible D2C brands that have emerged over the last 10 to 15 years, so many of them are rooted in that same thing. Like I was trying to get something that I needed that didn't exist. And so I had to create this. It wasn't just a business school problem where I'm seeing a gap in the industry and I'm going to go and fix it and try to scale this thing. It was really, really personal. So, like your role of marketer, I'd love to just, maybe spend a couple of minutes and help us understand how you balance out this mix between acquisition and really sort of like the brand storytelling to introduce folks to this entirely new category and a product that is purpose built for their needs.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of the brand storytelling and the customer acquisition are very closely related, right? That story resonates with a lot of people. Where some of the difficulty lies is explaining. I think the reality is that comfort is subjective, right? If you are upgrading from a pair of Skechers or something, relatively inexpensive pair of Skechers to a pair of like Hoka's, let's say, your subjective lived experience is going to be, okay, this is more comfortable, which is not to say that is the best thing that you can possibly wear for that specific application. Telling that story is part of the challenge, right? But it's sort of like getting the shoes on people's feet is the hard part. And then I think we have really strong customer retention because once people experience it for themselves and go, oh, there's like a light bulb that clicks. This is it. This is amazing. And we know from our post-purchase surveys that like over 70% of the people who are buying our shoes are switching off of running shoes, right? Including some very big brands, right? We like to talk about our shoes are designed for ERs, not PRs, right? That kind of plays.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that one's hot off the press. That's not in ads yet, but we'll be. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I love it. Hopefully that works.
But yeah, so the brand, everything that we do is really, like you said, it's solving a specific problem for people who have a really hard job. And everything we do is with love for that group. And it's actually in our name, right? So the Clove, the C with a bar over it, and medical shorthand means with. So the name is literally with love, right? So that really suffuses everything that we do as we, this is a really a love letter to people who are working in healthcare, doing an incredibly hard job that is very demanding on the body. And we genuinely want to improve their lives. Like we say inside every box, you support them, we support you. And that's really the ethos that we live.
I mean, I think that's an incredible story, and I'm happy we started there. Tell me a little bit about sort of your background. What did you do before ultimately landing at Clove?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a wild journey. So my first foray into marketing was I was working for an ad network. Back in 2007, 2008 was around the time I started, called Tribal Fusion. That was way back in the day. Like programmatic wasn't a thing. Not a lot of stuff was self-serve. Facebook was just a twinkle, in Zuckerberg's eye. And, from there, I went to a couple different ad networks, ended up working for a SaaS platform for a couple of years. That was a really interesting sort of ad copy optimization, crowdsourced, really interesting solution. And then, eventually landed up on the agency side. The through line for a lot of this was that I was client facing.
Okay.
So, that I think has been a formative experience. But yeah, was at agencies for a total of 5 years before switching to the brand side. And probably your experience will echo mine, but I think, agencies are an incredible place to learn. You get exposed to a lot of stuff. You get exposed to a lot of really cool brands. It's a crucible, I think, that forges better marketers. It's also incredibly stressful. Would you believe I had a full head of hair before I started? That's a lie. But yeah, no, I definitely, it's been a fun journey.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to choose, so like I did agency, then in-house, and then SaaS, and you did agency, SaaS, and then sort of in-house working at a brand. Do you have a favorite?
This is kind of a cop-out answer, but I think I needed them at different stages of my development.
Yeah.
I think, and they all kind of have different things to offer. A SaaS platform is really interesting, but also, a challenging environment, especially if you're in kind of a commoditized space. The agency game is tough, right? There's a million agencies out there. There's always a struggle, right? You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
If you do a bad job, you're getting fired. If you do an amazing job, you might put yourself out of a job, right? Because the ultimate goal for a lot of big brands is to get to the point where they can have everything fully in-house. So, but again, incredible place to learn. You get exposed to a lot of cool stuff. You work with some really cool people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me too, is like everything kind of happens for a reason. Like I loved my time in agency. I think it makes me a better partner to agencies now, whether we're working with them directly at Cord or we're working with agencies on behalf of some of our customers, like just understanding what they're up against and some of those challenges. And it also seems to be quite cyclical for me as well. I mean, there was a time in agency land where everyone was working with agencies, and then everyone needed to be in-house, and then it was sort of like this hybrid thing. And but yeah, you're right. I think it's definitely a great place to learn and to grow. The opportunity to be able to apply your craft across like a multitude of accounts at any one time for me was really interesting, and being able to share those learnings I loved. And then ultimately going in-house, being able to focus on like one brand and learning about that brand and learning about those customers was pretty awesome as well. And so I still consider myself at the end of the day to be a brand person. Every single brand that is on the Cord platform is, I've loved to learn about brands that I sort of feel like I'm now a part of. And so when I hear, and we'll talk about AI eventually today, but when I hear about, agentic shopping and, commerce is going away and we're going to have agents shopping for us, I'm like, well, hold on a sec. Like I really love to get to know brands and discover different things and call me old fashioned, if you will, but I like that part of it. And I don't, I'm not in a hurry for that to go away. And hopefully that's good news for marketers. I still think that there's like a real job to do to go and find out who are our best customers and how we can bring them in to the brand story and how we can get them all the way through. That's a sort of like perhaps like a clumsy segue into this bucket. We want to, as a brand, fill that bucket with as many great customers as we can. And, there are ways that I'm sure you've learned how to do that over time. If you were to sort of like to think about some patterns that you've seen emerge and perhaps evolve over the last two decades, has the hole in the bucket always been the same across your different stops, or have they changed? Maybe the patterns that you will have seen to identify where those holes are, if they're not all the same. Like let's dive into that leaky bucket problem.
I think maybe the first thing I would lead with is I think it's a James Clear quote that he says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I think that the hole in the bucket thing really kind of addresses that of, depending on what you're selling, depending on what life cycle stage you're at, that hole in the bucket is going to be different. But what you're really building is a process, right? It's, sort of knowing is half the battle, right? When you have a rock solid, rigorous methodical process to identify and get laser focused on where you need to have your time and resources invested to achieve the outcome that you want, then all of the other kind of bells and whistles that go along with that, are not as distracting as they might be otherwise.
So process, I'm hearing, you have, is it fair to say then that you've developed a process over the years to help you identify opportunities to optimize the funnel?
Yeah. And then the reality is it's not, I wish I could say that this is a really complex proprietary process, but it's a lot of just fundamentals, right? You need to understand who is buying, right? What is your split between first time and returning customers? What are they buying? Why are they buying? What product are they replacing, right? You're going to be potentially solving different problems for different people. We should, maybe later touch on post-purchase surveys, because I think that's like one thing that came up as I was thinking about a lot of these questions is that is an incredibly valuable tool that is helping to understand what people are looking for and, how people's, needs are changing over time. But yeah, I mean, the process is essentially, having a methodical process to look at, where are people dropping off in the purchase funnel? How is that changing over time? So, looking at this on a monthly basis, let's say, as a starting point, understanding, okay, how is this changing month over month and year over year? So you're seeing how things are changing in kind of like local maximums, but also getting a bigger picture view of, oh, wow, things are actually significantly different than they were a year ago. What is responsible for this change?
Okay. So, and it sounds like post-purchase surveys is one of the ways that you're accumulating that data to get to know your customer a little bit more. In terms of being able to zoom in to that funnel and understand, what is a customer's journey through, let's say one of your digital channels, how have the tools that you've used to measure that or to give you visibility, how have those evolved over time? And what are some of the tools that you're using today at Clove that'd be hard to live without?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, Google Analytics was sort of the biggest, the best solution for this. Prior to the advent of kind of MTA solutions that are giving you a second opinion on attribution, we put a lot of weight on Google Analytics, and that has changed. So, now we're using Triple Whale. We've evaluated other MTA platforms, but yeah, I mean, that's maybe the biggest change is that everything was really kind of living in that Google ecosystem. Previously, or some people had, in the old days, you had maybe ad servers and things like that where some of that data lived. But yeah, now you have a lot more tools at your disposal, and especially tools that are powered by AI.
Too many tools, would you say?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a couple of big names that have really risen to the top.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges of trying to. There's a sort of perennial challenge of staying abreast of all of the advancements in MarTech. And that's, one of the reasons I find marketing podcasts so valuable is like staying on the cutting edge of what's rising to the top and kind of cutting through the noise. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of players out there, but I think that the ones that are, doing a really job tend to rise to the top.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think like I've been so curious about what is the right amount of data to collect, like how do we get visibility into it? I think that you're right. When all things sort of attribution, multi-touch was the holy grail that we've been going after for the last little while. And now I think it is just an ingredient that is part of the recipe that we need to understand like what a healthy funnel looks like, in terms of visibility. And then how much do we want to be like absolutely data driven versus being data informed? And I think that brings us back to like, how necessary, like just the good instincts of being a marketer are. So how do you have enough data to be able to look at something, to be able to look at a customer journey, understand what the friction is, maybe work with product to sort of say, like, I've got this hypothesis that we're losing people here for the following reasons. I mean, attribution is great. It's going to tell you why you had a purchase, and maybe it's going to help inform like what creative was ultimately working. But as we think about some frictions that can show up if you've done the hard work to get the eyeballs on your website and to get people browsing, what sort of is it the GAs of the world? Is it your attribution platforms that you're going to look at to help identify opportunities to make the journey better?
Yeah, I'm almost going to say, identifying the hole in the bucket is almost the easy part, right? A lot of the hard work comes from, okay, now we know, right? We've got, just as by way of example, we've got a significant drop off between, let's say, somebody viewing a product and somebody actually adding to cart? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach that issue, right? A lot of it has to do with CRO, right? It can also be the audience, right? It can be who's actually coming to the site and engaging with it. And all of those things are kind of independently changing over time. And so there's also, of course, a process and a discipline to how do you actually move the needle, right? And I like to think a lot about kind of evolutionary versus revolutionary, right? Or in other words, building on things that work versus sort of leaving room for the possible, right? And sort of always testing and, giving yourself permission to try to throw a Hail Mary every now and again.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important to keep a balanced perspective on, okay, we're gonna go kind of incremental. I also like to think about it as sort of like, I call it like a mountain climber method. Like typically if you are, especially free solo climbing, right? Not that I do this, but you always want to have as many limbs on the wall as you can, right?
Yeah.
And I think about those kind of points of contact of being sort of the evolutionary, right? That's safe. If you are free solo climbing, you're probably not doing like the cliffhanger pull-up jump Sylvester thing, right? Where you're taking all of your hands off the wall and kind of betting everything on one sick move, right? That's a recipe for disaster,
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely plotted your course, but you have to remain nimble too. I mean, I think I wouldn't intend to get on the kind of the free solo analogy, but I think you have to be prepared out there if you don't have a rope. And, you have to sort of be creative and be able to think on your feet and say, yeah, I mean, the plan was to do this, but the weather is dictating that I need to do that. And I think like that is where you have to sort of rely on your instincts. And this is a clumsy analogy, but I'm going to go with it anyhow. I think about that sort of the knowing less, because I'm seeing across all of our customers more and more anonymous sessions. And so, you used to have a plan before where I would have pixel perfect attribution for 90+% of the sessions on my website. I knew exactly who the person was, where they came from, and ideally like what they wanted to see next. Now I don't. And so like maybe that's like a free soloist going up a route and was expecting to see a certain thing, and like suddenly it's not there. So now you need to do something else. In this world where we're increasingly creating experiences for more anonymous users, how have you evolved your thinking as a marketer? How has the playbook evolved? And what have you learned? What have you been the most surprised by? And what might you be trying next?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of things.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. It's a tricky route up the mountain.
So starting with sort of the anonymous sessions, I think this is one of many areas where post-purchase surveys have been helpful. Obviously it's only really giving you data for the people that are transacting, but it's really useful to know. This is a question everyone should be asking: is how did you hear about us, or what brought you here today? Because that is giving you, a second opinion on, okay, GA or Triple Whale or whatever is going to give you some data on, who's coming, but there's always going to be some unknown sessions, right? But the post-purchase survey data is at least going to give you directionally, if you kind of extrapolate that out for your full traffic. Okay, I'm seeing that a lot of people are coming in via word of mouth. I'm seeing a lot of people are coming in via paid channels. People are, seeing us in retail stores and coming to transact online and so forth. Sure. So, your original question was really big, so I might need you to.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm just when I think about marketing, if we rewind the clock maybe 10 years ago, it was very much performance marketing. So I knew what channels were delivering what revenue. And then as a performance marketer, it's sort of like, how do I balance my spending across those channels? How do I test into what campaigns are working and then allocate more spend over there? I think that we're in this era where there is definitely still some performance marketing to do. Going back to how I kicked us off with this idea of what it means to be an iconic brand. How do you build a brand that customers or soon-to-be customers want to be friends with? Being a marketer is about balancing out, how do I acquire customers, but how do I do traditional brand building, building a great product, building a great brand experience. And then in terms of the digital experience, the websites or apps have to do all the hard work of not just being acquisition channels, but also these brand building channels. And I think we're being forced back into that era of a more balanced approach to marketing because we know less about the customers who are actually on our site. We can infer certain things time of day, maybe where they might be coming from, but I don't know it's Nick on his mobile device that he's looked at these like 25 things before. So just sort of curious how that has changed your thinking, and even as a marketer, how you've needed to sort of approach that within your organization where there's more ambiguity now than there was before. And I think even how you interpret the data. Like, I love the post-purchase survey example you bring up, because if you think about the incentive structures of like if you use Google for attribution, well, Google's going to be incentivized to tell you what? That orders are coming from Google's channels. Right. Whereas the incentive structures of post-purchase surveys, like, I just want to get most people answering these questions for you as they possibly can, and I'm going to surface up the results. So I think having that balanced approach and being able to wrap all that up with experience and be able to say like, okay, this is what the data is telling me, and this is where I want to go. And so yeah, long-winded sort of setup to the question. I'd just be curious how your approach has shifted because we're entering more of this sort of like privacy-first world.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're unique in that our TAM hasn't really fundamentally changed deeply over time. Okay. So, when we make a product that is designed for healthcare workers, we know that from the post-purchase surveys that most of the people who are buying are healthcare workers, and most of the people who are not are people that are on their feet for long periods of time, right? So when it comes to kind of the job to be done of like, how do we kind of live rent-free in people's heads? Like we kind of understand the value prop that we need to be putting out there, to make ourselves appealing to that demographic. And it's very, it's unique too, because, healthcare workers are, very highly educated, right? They're well compensated. They can smell BS a mile away. They're dealing with people on a daily basis who are unreliable witnesses, even for their own, health issues, right? So, they're probably fundamentally different from kind of your average, shopper. So yeah, and then, as far as the first party data piece, yeah, I think, we've been able to weather the storm. I think there's, tech solutions out there, the likes of, Blot Out and Elevar and, Triple Whale's got their Sonar solution that are helping kind of bridge the gap as things like iOS have kind of broken some of that, tracking capability. But yeah, I mean, I think I would hazard to say that, by and large, that the sort of increase in sort of privacy considerations hasn't maybe been as big of an issue as other things like the, proliferation of the sort of smart campaigns, right? And kind of performance implications that's had.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's interesting. Let's go to smart campaigns. You mentioned kind of in the warm up that you like to listen to an awful lot of marketing podcasts. And, I sort of said you are a longtime listener, first time caller. This is the first time that you've been a guest on a podcast. You're doing great, by the way. It doesn't show that this is your first time. Have you, in sort of listening to some of these marketing podcasts over the last couple of months, have you noticed a shift in what marketers are talking about? Like, is it becoming overwhelmingly dominated by AI? And, how are you thinking about AI in the landscape of a smart campaign? And is that something that you and the team are going to be investing in?
Yeah. So yes, to answer your first question, yeah, AI is inescapable. We are, leaning into it from a marketing standpoint, especially things like, agentic AI kind of on-site shopping assistants. We're testing things around that. GEO is especially top of mind for us. We want to be showing up when people are searching for us on the LLMs. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the marketing pods I listen to are very kind of evergreen, right? Like, yes, they touch on those things, but then a lot of it is kind of what I was talking about of like the hole in the bucket and the fundamentals. The landscape is changing so much that you really can't be, building your foundation on sand, right? With things constantly changing. So I do appreciate that a lot of it is like tactical, useful, actionable stuff that is kind of more or less evergreen.
Okay. So go a little bit further there for me. So like in terms of evergreen, I like that. How, and you said that you all are dipping your toes in and trying different things. I'm interested actually, let's start with GEO, the newest acronym. So SEO is becoming GEO, or we need to do both. And for me, when I think about GEO, it's how do I make sure that my content is relevant to the LLM, so that if someone is searching for, shoes that are going to be comfortable because I'm on my feet all day, how do you guarantee that your brand shows up front and center there? So, have you tried, like, what are some initiatives or investments that you and the team have made in AI that are either working in ways that you want to double down on, or maybe take the opposite approach? You're like, geez, I really thought that was going to work, and I was kind of let down.
Yeah, I would say first off, I would kind of caveat by saying I'd say we're sort of trying to catch up rather than keep up, right? So we are actively making changes. There's a lot of, not necessarily conflicting information, but there's a lot of information out there. Nobody really has all of the answers, right? As far as like what exact things do you need to do. There's not like one consistent playbook that everyone's sort of echoing the same things.
Yeah,
so
it's just
we're trying
so
to
fast.
sort of like, we're trying to, look at all this. Like I get emails and I'm listening to podcasts and things on a daily basis. I'm trying to kind of synthesize everything into like, okay, what's the through line, that we need to be doing. So some of it is really just, simple things like, for instance, LLMs like to crawl reviews, right?
Yep.
So if you don't have a, dedicated reviews page on your site, that's a big problem. So making sure we're buttoned up there. There's structural things that I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around, things like, hidden pages that are, that have a lot of text that are only meant to be understood by these LLMs,
it's
right?
like the early days of SEO, like all of these pages that we're setting up with shadow links and
Yeah. But then there's also like Reddit, right? Reddit is a really interesting one because that is being used by LLMs. They place a lot of value on these sort of organic conversations that are happening, which, by its nature, it's a difficult, you can't kind of brute force that, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure that I know there are companies out there that are, seeding those conversations, but I guarantee you that's the kind of thing, just like with SEO, how, Google was constantly vigilant for the black hat and gray hat stuff. Yeah. I guarantee you there's, people at Reddit whose whole job is stamping things like that out, right?
Yeah. And you remember when the algorithm would change, you would figure out what Google's algorithm was for SEO. You would do a lot of work against that. You'd have great placement. And then like suddenly they would release a new version and everyone would scramble to catch up. I think the challenge that we have now with these LLMs is they're not the same. And they're learning all the time. They're always changing. So there's not we have figured it out. I think in some ways brands are going to have to be more honest. How do you have great reviews? Because I think you're right. That's a part of it. But also there's a community aspect. Can you have some of your best customers showing up in Reddit answering, being the first ones to answer, wow, I discovered this shoe and it literally my back pain gone. That's going to matter a ton. So I think we're getting back to this place of the LLMs are going to force us to do the real work, which is building great products, having a great brand, and sort of facilitating those conversations at scale that build community, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's who knows what the future holds, but I will say that this area is, probably the area where we feel sort of the most off balance, and I'm trying to kind of keep up with everything, and sort of playing defense.
Like everyone else, realistically, it might feel like people have it sorted out, but I haven't spoken to too many people that when you get them sitting around a dinner table and talking honestly, there's not too many people that are like, yeah, I've cracked the code on that.
Yeah, but I mean, at least in the short run, moves we're making are bearing fruit, as it relates to where we're showing up in the rankings on these models. So we're gonna, keep forging ahead and hope that these things keep bearing fruit.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then actually, when you think about, if I unpack some of the inputs that you just offered up in terms of how you show up as relevant in some of these things, it's humans that are creating reviews, humans that are participating in these Reddit conversations. And so this, in a month from now or 6 months from now, it's just agents that are doing the shopping doesn't really hold up to me because, you're still going to need that experience at the brand, and you're still going to need people to contribute to the public domain what their experience with those products are. And if you think about us as consumers, like, don't you like to tell people when you make this great discovery, you learn a new brand or you loved a new product, or if you had a bad experience with a brand or you had a bad experience with a product, like we equally like to share those experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember, I think the first time I, heard this idea of, basically just telling an AI agent, like, hey, go find me the best X thing for under Y price, et cetera, and just do that whole transaction for me. It's like, where's the fun in that? I think, you and I are similar in that, like, I nerd out on, trying to find the best bang for the buck and like, what's something that's going to last me a long time, that's going to be kind of future-proof, whatever it is. I like doing that research. But I can also understand if there's people that just, people are busy, have other things going on, balancing their career, kids, all this stuff. I can understand if you are willing to just set out a budget and say, I don't really want to be involved in this process. Just go find me the best thing.
Yeah.
That's not me, couldn't be me, but I understand if there's people out there like that.
Well, I mean, I can imagine like looking for certain patterns. Like, so, some LLMs are going to have access to my email. I noticed over the last 6 months, you bought this thing 12 times. Would you like me to buy this for you on a regular basis? Like, okay, like that's clearly that's clearly a commodity, and I'm okay sort of delegating that responsibility. And maybe that's the future of subscription, which I think is like a part of the e-commerce tech stack that has long been waiting for some amount of disruption. Yeah, those things, like things that I put on or in my body, I want to be involved in the discovery of those products and like researching the brand and having those conversations. It's a part of like my identity, I guess. Like that, to me, that's what it means to be a consumer. And I'm not in a hurry to shed that responsibility.
For sure. And, AI is not infallible and probably never will be. You see these instances on almost a daily basis of AI not having a consensus on like what day of the week it is, let alone what's the right, supplement that you should take for, a specific use case. So, I personally would not want to abdicate that kind of, critical thinking and research, but yeah, I'm sure there's folks that are willing to just kind of YOLO and leave it up to ChatGPT to decide.
The early adopters. Okay, so then it's fair to say that you all are thinking about how do you optimize for AI as a thought partner for shoppers. So like, how do you show up as like maybe the 2 or 3 brands that they want to consider? You want to be there, like that's really smart. What about AI in terms of tooling? Are there any sort of discoveries that you've made kind of personally that have made your daily workflow easier, or maybe things you've tried, you've abandoned? And what other tools are you all trying out?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I could point to specifically in this context of AI. So right now, Triple Whale, as I mentioned before, we're using it as our MTA solution. They have sort of an AI widget, Moby. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Sure, yeah, we have something that's similar. So I spent a bunch of time in Moby. I think they've done a nice job with it.
Right. Yeah, really, really powerful, easy to use. Really, it saves a lot of time. I think that's, the big thing. So that one is proven really useful on a kind of a day-to-day basis, especially for, there's not really any analysis I've like asked it to do that I couldn't do on my own, but it's definitely, like I said, a big time savings, right? It's just taking what is a very laborious kind of, menial task and really making it a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And it has been helpful as well in understanding. Yeah, I think that one of our biggest complaints, I won't name them out of respect for them, but a prior MTA platform that we had tried, I think the big thing that we were looking for is like, okay, what we really want is kind of a mixed media model, right? Of like, okay, you've sort of told us, here's your POV on what the efficiency of these different channels is. We also know that there's some diminishing returns, right? And there's sort of platonic ideal, optimum configuration of spend across channels and strategies that will get us the outcome that we're looking for, whether it's, maximize top line or maximize EBITDA, whatever that is. And this platform that we were using at the time was very, very self-serve and kind of trying to connect those dots ourselves. I think that, one strength of Triple Whale and Moby in particular is making it a lot easier to get at those, kind of, so what, right? Like, what is the actionable insight here?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So before you started using Triple Whale or Moby, was there any kind of more centralized or consolidated solution at Clove for business intelligence? Like, is there a data warehouse? Did you have a tool like a Tableau or a Looker?
Google Sheets.
Google Sheets. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you're
so
pulling data into
yeah,
Google Sheets and doing analysis there.
Yeah, we have used like BigQuery and things like that in the past. We never,
Okay.
we never really had like a, Tableau instance, but Google Sheets honestly has done a lot of the heavy lifting. We use it for a fair amount of stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm telling on myself a little bit
No,
for saying
no,
this,
no.
but it's honestly like, it's honestly very, very flexible, but it's like you get out of it what you put into it, right?
Totally. Yep. No, I think there's the amount of brands that will, when they're honest, like, you can be quite big and still be relying on Google Sheets for an awful lot of your models. And, some people are like, maybe I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but we still use it for the following things. And I think that's really interesting.
I spent a long time trying to stand up like a CDP, and did a lot of research on everything would be involved. And, at the time, it was just going to be an incredible amount of setup or an exorbitant cost when, we already had a system that did a fine job for free. So, it's a pretty high bar, that has to be crossed in order to justify an expense like that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, we spend a bunch of time in the CDP space, and I think being able to articulate its value proposition, for me, having all of I think first party data, as an industry, we've been harping on this first party data bandwagon for a while. I think more than ever, it's going to be really important, especially in this era of AI. And I think we're definitely in the early innings. But for me, it's about, if I really want AI to unlock efficiency within my business, I need to make sure that I'm giving it access to all of my data. Not to say that I'm taking all of this like private first party data and uploading it to the LLMs. That's not what I'm saying. But I want to have all of my data at least in some, maybe it's in Google Sheets, but maybe it's in something like a BigQuery. CDP can be a contributor to that. It's a really actually an efficient way to get good visibility and get that data in there. And then I want to make that available to large language models in the form of context. So if I ask it a so what, I want it to be able to give me an answer based on the totality of my data, not just something that might be like marketing specific or ops specific or finance specific, but no, like I want visibility across the entire business. And I think we're starting to see, or starting to hear about some of those struggles where I've tried AI, but I was somewhat disappointed because the results or the answers were generic. Well, they were generic because as an industry, we haven't done enough to think about, you said it before, this foundation of sand. If I don't have a solid foundation, if I don't have like solid data hygiene, well, the LLMs are only going to be able to create a guess based on some information that we might make available to them. So I think the real challenge for AI to deliver results is it starts and stops with data. Like, how good is our data? Do we trust that data? Well, now we can, instead of having to hire an entire suite of business analysts, I think we could reasonably use AI to help us get to the what an awful lot faster. And I think if we put the what in the hands of really smart marketers, I bet on us to be able to continue to create these great experiences for our customers that keep them coming back.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Marketers are a smart and scrappy bunch, and they will always find a way.
Yeah, they will always find a way. And I think the best marketers, and I've been so fortunate to work with, more than I can count on my two hands. And that the one common thing between all of them is that they're just super curious. They always want to be asking that question of the customer. They don't assume to always know the answer. And one of the things I liked about some of the things that you shared early on was that the landscape is always shifting. And I think if we show up with this preformed opinion of what our process is going to be and we're going to deploy it no matter what the data is telling us, then you're destined to fail. But if you show up with a point of view and a good place to start, but a willingness to have a conversation and be curious, then you will absolutely always find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, intellectual curiosity is one of the most important traits that we hire for. Right. I think it's invaluable to be able to do that self-examination and, kind of challenge your preconceived notions, to almost run like an RFP process
Yeah.
Internally, right? To revisit. Okay, this is a belief that we hold. Like we talk a lot internally about strong beliefs loosely held,
Yeah.
right? That as soon as the data sort of disproves belief that we hold, we are willing to change our perspective. We don't really hold anything that sacred, other than kind of core things about put the customer first, right? There's sort of philosophical things, of course, that we always believe no matter
are pillars.
what.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
I love that. I mean, it's probably like a great place for us to sort of wind up this conversation today. Is this notion of always being curious, but being built on top of that solid foundation and making sure that we have those pillars. So yeah, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing so much wisdom that you've accumulated through your journey across like a multitude of different stops. I'm excited to follow along and see what you and the team roll out next. And again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.